5. October 1975, Stuttgart. In one decade, I defended a camp guard. In the next, a bank bomber. Both swear the system is lying about them. He writes it in a narrow hand. A lawyer's hand. Carl H., born 1930, Swabian father in the eastern forests since 1944, missing. His sentence is not for court. It is for a notebook. It could not have been spoken aloud at the time. It sounds like provocation. It reads like arithmetic. It will unfurl over 30 years. 8 May 1945, near Bad Cannstatt, Württemberg, Baden, American zone. The boy watches the column arrive. Jeeps, armored cars, the fluorescent whiteness of the star. The house has no panes. The glass splinters were swept into a bucket and poured into the canal 2 months ago. The cellar still smells of burned wood and sour potatoes. A hand-lettered sign on the corner building reads, Küche. Super. Another reads Vorsicht Blindgänger. A third is simply names, a list of names pinned to a charred door. Missing. The local Ortsgruppenleiter gone, the teacher gone, the father gone. The mathematics of defeat is visible. You can count it. Window by window, street by street. Ton by ton of rubble into handcarts pushed by women with cloth headscarves. The Trümmerfrauen begin almost immediately. They organize because they must. They do not call it heroism. They call it warmth. Each load of brick a chance to dry one more blanket, one more small pair of shoes. An occupation report from the U.S. Mahn. Military government for Württemberg, Baden, June 1945, written in clipped English, notes, civilians appear fearful yet docile. Curfews are respected. Food situation precarious. It is the language of management. It reads like weather. A cold front passes. 800,000 calories short across a district. The mathematics of hunger is cruel and impartial. Ration cards allocate bread, fat, sugar. Men, 500 calories, sometimes less. Women and children, less still. The hunger winter of 1946-47 will drop energy to under 1,000 calories on some days. Coal arrives late, irregularly, then not at all. The freeze pours into stairwells and settles on ledger books. Hamsterfahrten, Carl's mother calls them. She walks out along the railway lines to a farmer rumoured to barter. She wears 2 coats, 3 blouses. She fills sleeves with peas. She returns with potatoes, once with half a ham, more often with nothing. In a school exercise book that survives in a family box, there is one line in a child's handwriting, "For 1 cigarette, we got 2 eggs." Cigarettes are currency now. The black market is a floor of exchange. A lucky strike is more liquid than the Reichsmark. In the Stuttgart market square, a man stands on a crate and offers American chocolate. He is a rumor as much as a man. Curfew at 9. Movement permits issued for travel to the next town. The Americans post lists of rules and lists of suspects. The fear is not only of the occupiers, it is of the neighbors. It is of the people who may remember what was said in 1943, what was done in 1938. In a charcoal-smudged journal, a woman writes, "I will not light the lamp on the landing, not yet." That sentence is preserved in an oral history recorded in 1983. It sounds like superstition. It is policy. The boy watches the displaced persons arrive. Jews from the East, French prisoners of war, Ostarbeiter in patched coats. They pass along with Soviet soldiers or under the watch of American sergeants. Some stay. They are directed to DP camps in former barracks on the edge of town. Ludwigsburg, Göppingen, Heidenheim. The U.S. Army report for September 1945 observes German civilians uneasy about proximity of DP camps, petty thefts claimed, evidence contradictory. The arithmetic of retribution is feared more than it is carried out. There are beatings at night, there are rapes, there are reparation seizures, there is also routine. The war, too, had routine. Denazification begins like a census. It becomes a ritual. There is a form. The Fragebogen lists affiliations, ranks, donations. The boy sees the paper move. He carries it for his mother to the parish hall. He watches men with clean collars and missing buttons fill it out. They write and rewrite sentences in pencil. I was only a follower. I had to join. I never held office. My business suffered for not join. Petitions suffered for not joining. Petitions circulate for personal shine, those scrubbed affidavits of character. He was always decent, one neighbor writes of another. He helped me when my husband fell ill. The mathematics of guilt is tallied on graph paper. 5 categories: Hauptschuldig, major offenders; belastete offenders; minder belastet, lesser offenders; Mittelfer followers; entlastet, exonerated. The lines are drawn in theory. The lines are drawn in theory. They blur in practice. Sprechkammer hearings take place in schools with broken windows. The caricature is simple. A stern Allied officer, a cornered German. The reality is more German. Local panels, local files, local leverage. The need for teachers reopens files. The need for engineers redefines Mittelfer. An Allied intelligence summary, December 1946. Continuing shortage of qualified personnel necessitates reconsideration of strict denazification policies. Political reorientation remains incomplete. Stability weighs more than purity. That is not cynicism. It is a policy choice. The mathematics of rebuilding requires bodies at desks, hands at lathes. It demands compromise that will be named later as convenience. A Bundesarchiv file from 1948, compiled in Stuttgart and coded under a bureaucratic letterhead, shows dispositions of 12,451 cases in one district. 4 major offenders, 47 offenders, 1,209 lesser offenders, 7,009 exonerated, 1,009 exonerated. The numbers draw a curve. The curve becomes memory. Millions arrive from the east. Germans from East Prussia, Silesia, Pomerania expelled in long columns, in cattle cars, They bring trunks with blankets and plates, and a small box with family papers, salvaged from burning houses at the end of frozen roads. They are registered and dispersed. The words on forms are neutral. On the ground, tensions sharpen. We have no rooms, a Stuttgart housing clerk writes in 1946. We have no rooms. He is 20 years old. His name is Karl H. He carries a stack of Belegungslisten into buildings with half their roofs missing. He posts notices. New family assigned to this flat, 2 rooms, shared kitchen, shared coal stove. He knocks and waits and hears the bolt slide back a little, not enough for a man to pass through. Inside, a woman with 2 children says she is not political, she simply cannot share with strangers. On the stair, a Silesian man says the same sentence, with different years behind it. In the municipal file there is a note, conflict, resolved after intervention. The intervention is a policeman and a priest. The arithmetic of rooms is brutal. 1 room and 7 claimants, 1 house with a roof and 3 addresses assigned. An occupation report from March 1946 confirms housing continues the most acute problem. Local animosity towards expellees significant. Propaganda potential dangerous. The report uses the word dangerous easily. It does not define it. In kitchens, dangerous is a cousin word for cold. The boy goes to a school where the teacher wears a civilian sweater under his jacket and a scarf in the classroom. He teaches the passive voice. Mistakes were made. In a reader from 1947, the unit titled Vom Vlies is about bees. Another unit recounts a raid in a neutral tone. The children count syllables and breaths. The Holocaust is not a unit. The teacher does not mention camps. He had reading material taken away in 1933. He has a cousin who disappeared in 1937. He does not mention these either. The arithmetic of speech in 1947 has limits. The DP camp near Ludwigsburg is fenced. The fences are not for imprisonment now. They are for separation, for sanitation, for fear. In 1946, an American chaplain files a report. Germans from nearby town have begun trading bread for shoes with the Jewish DPs. Some altercations, some friendships. Oral histories taken in the 1990s preserve a woman's sentence. I saw a man with numbers on his arm. I pretended not to see. Then I could not stop seeing. Another says, we never knew. How could we? We knew the lane by the mill. We did not know beyond it. Both sentences are true to their speakers. Neither erases the other. The mathematics of proximity is messy. 20 kilometers can be a veil. A railway spur can be a rumor. The sound of a train passing at night can be both. Allied photo albums are open to Germans in town halls. Some look, some do not. A U.S. military civil affairs officer writes in 1945, many claim ignorance. Others weep and say nothing. 20. June 1948. Currency reform. The D-mark arrives like a rainstorm. It changes the ending of almost every sentence. Shops that were empty on Saturday are full on Monday. Sugar, potatoes, soap. The black market collapses. Cigarettes remain currency in corners, but the floor of exchange shifts. Marshall Plan shipments follow. Crates with stencils, USA. Towns receive barrels of powdered milk, sacks of flour, sewing machines, steel bars. A U.S. information service film shows smiling women making coffee with donut tins. The narrator speaks of recovery. It is aspirational. It is not false. The Wirtschaftswunder does not fall from the sky like the word implies. It is built from overtime in welding shops, from contracts written at kitchen tables. In Esslingen, in Sindelfingen, in Stuttgart-Feuerbach, new factories press steel into forms that glint under ceiling lights and smell of oil. In offices with new glass, men in shirt sleeves study charts of costs and outputs. An engineer murmurs, just in time, before it is fashionable. The arithmetic of growth is still arithmetic. A conveyor belt loaded at one end must be unloaded at the other. Karl takes the tram to Tübingen in 1948 to attend law lectures in wool trousers that itch. He leans in a drafty auditorium and listens to a professor who was not removed in 1945, explain civil procedure as if no regime had ever used it to crush a man. He studies Roman law. He studies property. He studies the way a question is framed in a courtroom to be both narrow and large. The denazification system shifts in these years. It becomes self-administered. It becomes quieter. The workload is crushing. Cases pile up. Appeals are filed. Mitläufer is a blanket. It is useful. It warms the bureaucracy. The Federal Republic is founded in 1949 with a basic law that calls itself provisional and then becomes durable. The 131er Gesetz, Article 31 of the Basic Law, restores pensions and posts to former civil servants. The decision is not hidden. It is explained as necessity. Many Germans greet it with relief. Some greet it with bile. Allied intelligence summaries note growing tendencies toward amnesty and forgetting. The mathematics of staffing the new police, the new ministries, the schools result in names recurring in letterheads that also recur in 1937 phone books. In the municipal legal office, Karl writes memos about zoning and noise ordinances. He writes them with the clarity of a man who wishes the law to be a wall against weather. He wants it to hold. In 1954, he passes the second state examination and opens a small practice near the Marktplatz. He defends stolen bicycles, minor frauds, divorces. He learns to watch faces. He learns the uses of silence. In 1957, he takes a case that turns into a file with red thread running through the holes. A former party official calls him from a village near Heilbronn. The man's denazification case was decided in 1948 as Mittelalter. Now a new accusation arrives. He is said to have denounced. The file contains a letter in a rounded Sutherland hand that names the exact day and the street. It names a window and a sentence shouted through it. He loses the case. He writes in his journal, "We are not finished. We never will be." The economy rises. Volkswagen expands. Bosch hums. Daimler punches a clock with thousands of fists. The unions negotiate. The SPD calibrates. Newspapers write about abundance. Radios sell well. Television arrives in living rooms with crocheted doilies under it. In his office, Karl defends a truck driver who stole copper wire and a foreman who hit his apprentice. He handles the divorce of a woman whose husband drinks the dishwasher's wage. He defends a former policeman who wants his pension recalculated after a truncated denazification. The Nachkriegskinder grow into teenagers. They wear blue jeans. They sing in English. Schoolbooks in 1958 still describe the Nazi period with a soft voice. In those years, one text says, our people suffered many reverses. The bombings are emphasized. The expulsion is described in pages that mention our lost eastern territories, as if the community were a single organism without organs. The victims have no faces yet. 1963, Frankfurt. The Auschwitz trial begins. A prosecutor named Fritz Bauer pushes through the thicket. He insists on naming names. He insists on the difference between a system and responsibility within it. He reopens doors that the new country had quietly painted shut. The press prints the word Auschwitz in headlines. The courtroom is a machine that converts testimony into paper. There are days when it fails. There are days when it tears at tissue. Karl is asked to serve as one of the appointed defense counsel for a minor defendant. The man is a former guard, one among many. He is not a commander. He is not a designer. He is pale now. He trembles when he lights a cigarette. He repeats phrases from the 1950s. I had to. I did not know. The file contains depositions in which survivors remember his face and a gesture with a baton. The mathematics of memory is not simple. It is not a ledger. It is a struggle with fog and glare. The court calls witnesses from Israel, from Poland. They speak German, some of them with a rhythm that slows the room. The recorder writes more carefully when they speak. Karl writes in his notebook then, the law weighs and weighs. We can say it cannot weigh the dead, but we still weigh. He watches how the accused sits. He watches a survivor look at him and not recognize him for a moment, then stiffen. He questions a witness about dates and is ashamed by his own voice. He then questions the file. He asks the judge to consider the time between that winter and this one. He loses those motions. It is right that he does. He returns to Stuttgart for weekends and sits at the kitchen table with his wife and their daughter, who is 13 and fiercely curious. She has asked why they did not know. His answer is not a sentence. It is a period of silence. 1966 Stuttgart. New apartment blocks rise near Zuffenhausen. The streets are named for composers. The expellees have built clubs and memorials to villages that no longer exist in the East. They come together and sing songs of homeland in halls that smell of pretzels and beer. Associations of Heimatvertriebene lobby for recognition and restitution. The Bundevertriebenen prints maps. The Cold War has made the borders hard. The Federal Republic recognizes the Oder-Neisse line only in 1970. In the 1950s, the map of memory remains a possibility. The arithmetic of loss adds as if the sum could make a place appear. Displaced persons, camps empty, slowly. Many Jews leave for America, for Israel. Some stay and establish communities that never existed in this shape in Germany before. The German state begins to pay reparations. The language is unwieldy. It calls payments. Wiedergutmachung, an impossible word, a word that cannot be real. The file numbers pile up. The moral math never resolves. The Cold War's mathematics overlays another grid. The Federal Republic integrates into NATO. It rearms. Former Wehrmacht officers lecture the new Bundeswehr on innere Führung, a doctrine meant to marry soldiering to citizenship. The students of 1968 will call them opportunists. Some are not. 1967, Berlin. A student is shot at a demonstration. A movement swells. It crescendos elsewhere, but its echo in Stuttgart reaches Karl's office. His daughter sits at a table with friends and reads leaflets. She quotes poems. She asks about the judge's past, about the prosecutor's past, about his. He tells her he was a boy in the rubble, a clerk with a Belegungsliste. She says, that is not an answer. She is right. He writes in the notebook what answer would satisfy. He watches the city begin to produce a new kind of file. It is called a Verfassungsschutzbericht. It monitors extremism of the left and the right. He reads it with an eye trained by years of municipal prose. He feels older than the men who write it. 1970 Stuttgart. Bombs explode in bank foyers in Frankfurt and Hamburg. The groups call themselves by numbers and initials. Their communiques claim to unmask the fascist state. Their photographs show young men and women with hard eyes. The police reorganize, centralize. The Federal Criminal Police Office grows teeth. New laws criminalize support networks, posters, printed sympathies. Lawyers are appointed. Some volunteer. The courtroom becomes a theater for unresolved histories. Defense counsels are searched. The question, who is the state, is asked in different registers. In 1972, the May Offensive kills people by design. A U.S. Army officer dies in Heidelberg. Bundesarchiv press clippings show a sequence of immediate reactions: shock, condemnation, a search for words that do not come easily in a country where all strong words smell of earlier crimes. People line up to give blood. Others hang posters with heads of young fugitives and black strips at the bottom where the word "tot" will later be printed when a body is found. The mathematics of justice shifts again. It becomes about prevention. It becomes about the balance between rights and urgency. It becomes about time in cells and light bulbs that do not go off. Stammheim prison rises on a hill outside Stuttgart. It is not glamorous. It is modern. It is a concrete box with reinforced glass and steel doors. In 1975, trials begin that will be called showdowns. They are also savings accounts of decades. Balances of debts and interest and unspent words are kept there. Karl, now 45, thinning hair, steady in gait, is appointed counsel for a defendant in a bank bombing case. The young man is gaunt. He is not eloquent in court. He has slogans that sound like borrowed instruments. The system is lying about me. The class justice. Karl hears an echo from other years. In 1964, the guard had said, "The system was everything and I was nothing." This is not a parallel that absolves. It is another rhythm. The mathematics of grievance is iterative. It consumes the numbers that fed it, then grows from them. He writes the opening sentence of this story in his notebook, the week after a hearing in which his motions are denied. He argues about solitary confinement. He argues about reading materials. He argues about the definition of a terrorist association under new statutes. He loses and wins small points that feel like pebbles against a wall. He writes to his wife, "We need the law more when we are most angry." In the court cafeteria, a junior prosecutor mutters, "You'll defend anyone," a sentence that is meant as a curse and lands as a job description. In the hall, an older court usher nods to him as if they once shared a canteen line. Documents accumulate. He indexes everything. He keeps clippings. He writes dates in the margins. He crosses out adjectives and leaves nouns. Later historians will find a box in a Stuttgart archive labeled H. Kansley, 1960-1979. They will read drafts that begin, "The conditions of the defendant's isolation cannot be justified." There is also a letter in which he declines to sign a petition drafted by younger lawyers that declares the Federal Republic continuity of fascism. That is a line he will not cross. He does not sign because he believes this state is not that state. He also does not sign because he knows that words like fascism, used as noise, make it harder to hear the true content when it arrives again in another form. The municipal files from the 1950s are not gone. They sit in grey boxes. The Belagungs listen have pencil marks in the margins in his hand. The denazification files have stamps in purple ink and notes that his writing teacher would have recognized. So do the court files from Frankfurt. So does Stammheim, in carbon copies that saturate one page and ghost on the next. His life has been paper and rooms. He sees the thread that runs through. The front line is a ledger. The battleground is a hearing room with hinged chairs. He recalls the first time he saw a Trümmerfrau lift a brick and pass it on. He recalls the first time he stood outside a DP camp fence and waited for a man to bring him a spool of thread in exchange for a loaf. He remembers a sentence overheard at a Sprüchkammer in 1947. "You cannot live in nothing." A judge said it when assigning housing, despite objections. It was administrative philosophy. It was also national theology. The mathematics of guilt isn't a metaphor to him. It was a literal, procedurally organized hierarchy. It produced decisions. It also produced habits. The habit of replacing guilt with category. The habit of silencing with compromise. The habit of thinking in necessary fictions. The schoolbooks of the 1950s, the speeches at Volkstrauertag, the memorials that emphasize the German dead and leave others unnamed. These elements are not lies, they are selections. They are the arithmetic of memory in the first 2 decades after a catastrophe. Only later does the textbook include photographs of camps next to maps of air raids. Only later do teachers say, "We killed." Only later do ceremonies in towns name the Jewish families who lived there and were deported. Between those laters and the nows, people live. Karl lives in a city that grows shopping arcades, where the 1944 firestorm once lifted doors into the air. He lives in a country that in 1970 signs treaties recognizing borders that would have saved lives if recognized in 1939. He lives near factories that employ new workers from Italy, Turkey, Greece. He hears Swabian, Silesian, Turkish in the same tram and sits with a client from Ankara at a table where a client from Breslau once cried. The mathematics of belonging is recalculated in another script again. He looks at the RAF defendant and sees a young man who invests himself in an algebra of innocence. In this algebra, removing an actor's agency multiplies the grandeur of structures and divides the human debt by names until it approaches zero. It is a calculus designed to erase the self. He has seen it before. He saw it in the files of the guard. Orders were orders. I was a wheel. The law is supposed to prevent that sentence from becoming the only sentence a country can speak. In a binder labeled Stuttgart, Stammheim, 1975, there is a draft argument that begins, "The modern state must be strongest at its self-limitation." The phrase comes from a jurist he admired at university, a man who wrote on Innere Freiheit. It is easy to print. It is hard to practice. He watches as his client is convicted. He watches as the family of a bank clerk killed in the bombing holds each other. He does not confuse outcomes. He does not equate. He compares the processes. He measures the drift. He sees that the economics called miracle required a political economy of forgetting. He sees that forgetting had degrees, markets, and sanctions. In 1951, amnesty laws for low-level offenders. In 1954, a larger amnesty that folds more back in. In the same years, generous payments to excise the pain of expulsion. These were policies. They were reasons. They had votes. He made arguments under them. He also wrote a note in 1960, after meeting a man who had been passed over for a teaching post because he had been too vocal about his socialist past in 1931. Our system now is not neutral to history. It is an arrangement of history. He was not alone in thinking this. It did not make him special. It made him a citizen. In 1975, the city still has ruins in basements. At Christmas, children pull up old tiles from the ground in an empty lot and bring them to their fathers to use as coasters. The lot was a tenement. The lot is a car park. Under it is a different kind of silence. On the memorial wall in the city cemetery, a bronze plaque lists the months of air raids. It lists no names. In a small square, a new stone lists the names of the Jewish families and the dates of their deportation. People stop and read. Some bow, some do not. The arithmetic of commemoration shifts centimeter by centimeter. In bedrooms, marriages measure themselves against a country's slow exhalations. Karl does not talk much at home. He did not when he was a boy, and he does not when he is a man. In the late 1960s, his wife asked if they would attend a screening of a documentary about a camp. He said yes. He did not say why that week he avoided the room with the television. He defended guards in court. He sat in a barber's chair and listened to a man say, "We had it worse," and he said nothing. He listened to a young activist in a student union say, "Nothing has changed," and he said nothing. He saved sentences for the notebooks. An oral history recorded with a Trümmerfrau named Hannah Lorem in 1981 contains the line, "We did not talk because, at the end of the day, our throats were full of dust." This is not an excuse. It is a description. It is a sentence. Karl copies into his journal. He underlines dust. He writes next to it, also of fear. He knows the people like him arranged compromises and learned to place them in drawers. He knows they handled denazification like a task, and later like a chore, and later like a memory. He knows that the most dangerous sentence in any language starts with "we." The Cold War adds a mathematics of binary. It is easier to be West than to be complicated. The Federal Republic's parties prefer clarity. The internal security apparatus prefers patterns. The RAF trial makes the court a stage where a nation declares itself not to be fascist by repeating and affirming the word law. That theatre is not merely word law. It is also a protection, a screen against the past returning with different emblems. Karl's insistence on rights for a man accused of placing a bomb in a bank is not a romance. It is the refusal to allow state necessity to harden into state truth. He knows what happened when necessity was the only tense in official grammar. There is a file from 1975 in the Bundesarchiv labeled Public Perception of Terrorism Trials. It contains summaries of letters to newspapers. They form a chorus of anger, fear, faith, and fatigue. Hang them. Give them fair trials. They are our children. They aren't Germans. We did enough evil. We learned nothing. The contradictions are predictable. They are not trivial. They are the sound a society makes when it tries to square old circles. In another folder, a textbook from 1969 is marked up by a teacher in Heilbronn. It adds a note to the chapter on 1933. Ask your grandparents where they were that year. It is a tiny intervention. It is an invitation to new math. Subtract certainty. Add questions. Multiply context. Divide slogans. Carl's daughter brings home similar assignments. She asks him again. He tells her about the housing lists. He tells her about the day an American captain stood in their stairwell and said in German, "Not allowed," and only then did the neighbor bring out the sausage she had hidden. He tells her about the first time he saw an Allied album, and he tells her that he believes the law to be the only antidote to the hunger for simplicity. She accuses him of being cold. He tells her he is tired. They are both honest. He continues to defend. He defends men charged under the Nazi concentration camp guard, doctrine repurposed into German criminal law as Mord aus niedrigen Beweggründen, murder from base motives. He defends a woman charged with aiding an illegal association by giving a bed for a night to a friend of a friend. He defends a former policeman who beat a demonstrator with a baton. He argues both sides of the state in court, but never both in a day. He files, he appeals, he watches judges retire who wore robes under a different eagle. He does not file petitions to remove them because the law does not allow it. He files motions to recuse when a particular biography is too close to a particular case. Sometimes he is granted. Often he is not. There are details that historians like. They are the signs of the banal. He notes they are the signs of the real. A stamp ordered in 1950 has the same ink color as one ordered in 1975. A hallway that smelled of cabbage in 1947 smells of coffee in 1967 and of disinfectant in 1977. Paper gradually becomes whiter. Ink pens shift from fountain to ballpoint. Files move from string to metal clips. These are the details of a civil life that does not end because something enormous happened. The war after the war was paper. The truce after the war was agreements that thickened into systems. The enemy after the war was not a nation. It was drift and fear and the desire to simplify. He writes, "I prefer the bureaucracy to the barricade." He knows that this preference can kill too, when it becomes the only sentence a country can speak. He chooses it anyway, with qualifications and underlining. He always returns to arithmetic. In 1946, the calories per day. In 1948, the marks per ration card. In 1951, the amnesty paragraphs. In 1954, the pensions recalculated. In 1963, the counts, the paragraphs in the Strafgesetzbuch. In 1975, the Criminal Code's sections on terrorist association. Each is a number attached to a life. Each is a place where a decision is forced. He is not a hero. He is not a villain. He writes on behalf of men who cannot write for themselves or will not or should not. His sentences sometimes hurt people. Motion denied can be a wound. Motion granted can be a wound too. He knows the ache of survivors when hearing a guard's counsel ask if they precisely recall the angle of a shout. He knows their anger when a defendant reverts to a well-worn plea. He knows the disgust of a bank clerk's widow when hearing a lawyer talk about legality in the face of scales that will not balance. He knows these are not symmetric. He knows symmetry is a temptation that leads to fraud. He writes himself a rule. Weigh, do not equalize. In his later notebooks, he writes sentences that are as simple as the first and as dangerous. We created a state on bargains. We balanced hunger with silence. We traded justice for jobs. We paid for growth with erasure. He writes these in the 1970s, not in hindsight. He knows they are both true and unfair as generalizations. He writes another sentence beneath them, better this state than the other. He underlines better twice. He does not apologize for that. He does not need to. He is still a citizen of a place where the police ring a doorbell. In the winter of 1975-76, a snow falls that is too thin to be quiet. but enough to give every roof a white edge. He walks past the square where a new memorial lists more names, not just German ones. He reads each surname and the year they left, not always voluntarily. It is a litany that includes Glixman, Kuhn, Lewin. He mutters each, then his own H. He is not religious. He knows the value of prayer is not in its object, but its rhythm. He has kept a letter from a woman he helped in 1940. She had 3 children and a husband killed in 1943 at Kursk. She later voted for the CDU, then the SPD, then stayed home. Her daughter became a nurse. She wrote him in 1962, "I have my apartment now. We will move the bed on Saturday. You were stern that day in our kitchen. We were unkind. I wanted to thank you anyway." He unfolds it sometimes when the radio mutters news of bombs or arrests or resignations. He holds the paper between 2 fingers. He thinks of the day the policeman and the priest stood in that kitchen and assigned a room to strangers. He thinks of the days in court, WOW.